And once we take into account these two processes, I think we can then explain not only the universality of religion, but also cultural variability of religion. So the argument that I'm going to defend in the rest of this talk is the idea that religion evolved as an evolutionary byproduct from a genetic perspective. It wasn't an adaptation from a genetic perspective. But then once it arose, once it was there, it was part of our minds and brains, then it was exploited through cultural mechanisms to solve important problems that humanity faces. So in the remainder of the talk, I'll talk about, I'll briefly talk about the basic foundations of religion that I was alluding to. Then I'll talk about two of the more important social functions of religion that a lot of research is investigating these days. One is relief from existential anxieties, and the rest of the talk will be about religion as a facilitator of cooperation in large anonymous groups. So the first, so what about the foundation of religion? So how do we conceptualize the building blocks of religion? There are different ways we can do this, but here is one way. The anthropologist Scott Atherton and I presented this model. This is not a definition of religion. Again, we can add or subtract things from this model if you'd like. We're just saying when we say religion, we're looking at these phenomena. We're looking at, for instance, the fact that people believe in supernatural agents, gods, spirits, angels, jinns, ghosts, etc. So that's going to be part of the picture if we want to explain religion. These supernatural agents are not just simply believed in, but they relieve existential concerns. So, the problem of death seemed to be a central element of religions, and religions, as a result, the promise of immortality, for example, seems to be a widespread, if not universal, aspect of religions. Another very important element of religions is costly commitment. So people are not simply believing in the supernatural agents. If that's all there is to religion, then religion is no different from folk tales or fairy tales, where you read about fairies or angels, etc. But there is no passionate, costly commitment. So there is something about religion that evokes passionate, costly commitment to these beliefs that we need to explain. And finally, we think that the rhythmic coordination of these different beliefs brought together through emotional ritual is what cements these beliefs together and tie people into a community. So ritual is going to be a very important part of religion as well. A good way to remember this is the 4 C's of religion: counterintuition, compassion, commitment, and communion. All right. So then we're going to move on to explaining. So supernatural agent beliefs are really central here, of course. So let's start from there. So I thought, no talk is complete without a Far Side cartoon. God at his computer. One of the main questions that is being investigated by researchers in these fields, especially in the cognitive science of religion field, is the question of how is it people conceptualize, how is it people mentally represent supernatural concepts such as God or ancestor spirits or ghosts, etc. And I'm here to tell you that one of the conclusions that we have come up with is that there is no God part of the brain. This might come as a surprise, but nobody has found a brain area where God resides. So then how is it that people mentally represent God? Well, turns out actually it's quite ordinary. The story is that people, and this comes from the cognitive science literature, people represent concepts in at least two ways: implicitly and explicitly, tacitly and explicitly. If we ask people simply in an interview, well, what do you think God is? People might give theologically correct answers, meaning that they say whatever they've been taught in church, synagogue, temple, mosque, etc. But when researchers measure how people are thinking about God without them being consciously aware of researchers measuring their beliefs, then we find that people strongly anthropomorphize God concepts. Even people who explicitly deny that they don't think that God is a human being, like the man on this white bearded man on the computer. This is almost like a caricature, but actually experiments show that people do anthropomorphize God in this way. So for example, when people read stories where God is trying to respond to people in distress, what we find in reaction time measures, for example, and memory, how people remember the story, is that people think that God responds to Jimmy first, who's stuck under a tree. Then, after that, he goes and saves the girl who's drowning in the ocean. Even though, in principle, God should be able to do all these things simultaneously, right, in the theological way. But in the people's online reasoning, they assume the same things that they assume about other human minds, other human beings. So at the implicit level, God concepts are anthropomorphized, but at the explicit level, people believe that there are certain systematic aspects of God that depart from human capabilities. So there are systematic violations of our understanding of human psychology. So God, for example, can read people's minds, can go through God or ghosts or whatever you'd like. Ghosts, for example, in most respects are like human beings. They have beliefs, they have desires, they can get angry, they can want things from others, but they have other qualities that are quite extraordinary. So they could go through objects, they might not die, although some ghosts die, they might not experience hunger, etc. So there are violations of our understanding of how human beings operate, but for the majority of the aspects that people believe in, it's basically standard theory of mind, so to speak. People attribute mental states to supernatural agents in the same way that they attribute mental states to other human beings. So essentially what religion is doing is parasitizing on an already existing psychological structure that is used for everyday understanding of the social world. In this case, we take it and then we exploit it for other purposes. Let me give you a little bit of a sense of how we can then, once we take this perspective, we can generate and we can understand how supernatural beliefs emerge in different cultures. So I know this is a complicated table, bear with me for a second, but I'll just point you to a couple of interesting things here. So the idea that is now gaining a lot of momentum in the evolutionary study of religion is that like I said, belief in supernatural agents itself is not an adaptation for anything, but it's a cognitive byproduct of the way we think about the world. So there's nothing special about religious cognition. There's no special domain for religious thinking, like there is a special domain for language or for theory of mind. On the contrary, religion exploits these already existing structures that we already have and we use for other purposes. So for example, psychologists have found that we have at least 3 different conceptual domains, possibly more. So for example, we have special ways of thinking about physical objects. We have special ways of, so for example, we assume that if one object comes into contact with another object, then the object will exert a force on the other object. Even babies realize this. We understand that when objects move in space, they don't disintegrate, they actually move in a coherent manner. If you show babies an object moving into space that kind of becomes incoherent, they're surprised. Right? So these are implicit assumptions, constraints we have about the ordinary world that we apply to physical objects. There are similar kinds of constraints on biological entities. For instance, we impute an essence to biological entities in a way that we don't do for just physical objects like furniture. And then there's the psychological domain, of course, right? In the psychological domain, the most prominent capacity we have is a theory of mind. We attribute mental states to other human beings, and we understand people's behaviors in terms of these mental states. We don't treat them as objects, physical objects.